All right, it's time to get going. How was your morning, Joomla folks? All right, I've been hearing lots of great community stories today, so it's really exciting to be kicking off our second keynote of the day with Matt Mullenweg, the founder of Automattic and WordPress. As a Joomla user, you might be asking yourself, why WordPress at a Joomla event? Right? Back in May, we had a number of meetings with the organizational team about different speakers and keynotes we could have today. And we knew at that time we'd be planning a number of community sessions, which ultimately ended up in day 3 that we're in right now. So we thought it would be really great to reach out to another open source community. And after talking with a number of people, we realized that WordPress would be a great fit. And luckily, Matt could be here today and talk about his open source journey. So I really can't give Matt much more of an introduction to most of the people in this room. So without further ado, let's give a nice, warm Joomla welcome to Matt Mullenweg.
Howdy. I gotta tell you guys, I'm so glad to be here. I'm such a huge fan of Mambo. Whoops. Drupal. I love Drupal. I'm excited to be here to talk to the Joomla community. I almost screwed it up a third time. The talk today I'm calling The Story of WordPress and I. That's my name, Matt Mullenweg. My Twitter, if you want to tweet me during this, is @photomat. And my website is ma.tt. The reason it's the story of WordPress and I is because there's actually I'm going to talk about both the WordPress community and its evolution over the past 10 years, Automattic, the company I founded, and some of the interaction between those and just what's been going on, like what have we done. But I'm hoping to save the majority of the time for question and answer, because really the reason I came, it's a beautiful Sunday morning, I got all dressed up for you guys, was to have a conversation. And I'm very curious what you guys, it's not a shy crowd, it seems like, so. I think we have a lot we could learn from each other. I know Andy's been here for a day, and there's more at it. So without further ado, my story begins in Houston, Texas. Any Texans here? Nice. Both of you, I'm very glad to see you. We definitely have a much heavier Texas contingent in the WordPress community. As I was growing up, as you can see, these are throughout the years and various hairstyles, I was actually mostly focused on music. I played the saxophone. I started in 2nd grade, and through then, saxophone players in here? A little bit more of a contingent. Started in 2nd grade, and then when I was in middle school, I had 2 options. I could go to the all-boys Catholic school that my grandfather and all my uncles and everyone had been to, or if I could, there was a school you could audition to get into called the High School for the Performing and Visual Arts. And that was a co-ed school, and so I started practicing really hard. Actually, in addition to the saxophone, 2 years before I auditioned, I started learning the French horn as well, just because French horn is much less competitive than saxophone. So I actually auditioned on both. Luckily, I got in on sax, because I was terrible at the French horn. But it was a really interesting experience for a few reasons. One, the school was unique. It might be unheard of in Texas, but there was no sports teams, no football team. We just had 3 hours plus of our art area every day. And some really cool people went there. Beyonce attended the school before she dropped out to pursue Destiny's Child. Robert Glasper, who just won the R&B Grammy last year. He's a jazz musician who actually I played with. So it was a lot of fun. And I discovered probably my first love, barbecue. You barbecue fans? We'll meet up later. See what Boston has to offer. I don't know. While I was in high school, I started a blog. I'm going to show you guys this blog. Please do not laugh too much. As you could tell, it was very exciting. The title there is Blue Train, News from Me, Stuff That Matters. I think half of that is borrowed from Slashdot. And as you can see, the topics I covered were very, very personal blogging. I was talking about being sick on Valentine's Day, the Department of Justice attacking Microsoft, Apple, and Linux stuff. So those were sort of my passions at the time. And this was powered by Movable Type. Does anyone remember Movable Type? It's actually still going. At the time of the sort of self-hosted blogging market, it probably had like a 90-95% market share. It was utterly dominant. But using it, it was written in Perl, and it wasn't open source, although you could read the source and hack it if you wanted to. But the thing that really drove me crazy was you had to rebuild. It made static HTML files, so every time you did a new post, it would kind of have to rebuild every single HTML file. And of course, the longer you were blogging, the slower it would get. I was very impatient, so after about a month or two, I looked for something better. And I came across this. It was called B2 Cafe Log. This website and this image are still up there today. It's kind of funny. Like, for some reason, until like last year, I thought that this, I actually don't know if it's a man or woman, was skydiving. But as you can see, there's like a car in the sunglasses. So if they're skydiving, they're very close to finishing. But as you can see, it is a classy news and weblog tool, aka Logware. It was founded by a guy named Michel Valderetti. He was in Corsica, France at the time. And it was open source, GPL, in fact. And I loved that it had sort of what I considered an elegance to how it was written. It was very easy to learn and sort of hack around in. And no rebuilding. And also no CGI bins or permissions errors. Like, remember that? Like, I can't believe we used to do this. So I started using B2. This is what the interface looked at the time. This is B2.6.2.1. It was also my first contribution to an open source project. I had been sort of, at this stage, modifying other people's PHP scripts. I actually bartered websites and hand-built computers. I'd buy the parts and put them together in exchange for lessons from local jazz musicians. So I was making 5 or 10 websites at the time, and it set up like vBulletin and PHP BB and a few different things. Guest books. Remember guest books? Counters that iterated every time someone loaded the page. Like, you know, it was wild and woolly times. But my first ever patch to B2 was actually one around typography. So I was kind of a typography nerd. And you know, I mean, everyone here is pretty tech savvy. You know, if you want to write the word don't, for example, D-O-N''T, and you type it on your keyboard, what you're actually getting instead of apostrophe is a single prime mark. It's straight up and down. It's not curly, actual apostrophe. Word and all these sort of programs will, you know, sort of automatically curl those, but there was nothing on the web that would do this. So every time I, you know, very anally would write the word don't or can't or something like that, won't, I would type in D-O-N, ampersand, hash, 8217, semicolon, T. And I was impatient with the rebuilding. You can't imagine how much this was driving me crazy. So I got a book called Mastering Regular Expressions, and then I had 2 problems. Some people got that, I'm glad. But eventually made this thing called Texturize. It was basically a set of regular expressions that would look at text and try to do smart things with all the punctuation. Turn 3 subsequent periods into an ellipses, change quotes to curly, single primes to apostrophes. And the tagline was, "So good, it'll make your quotes curl." So Michelle saw this and said, "Hey, this code is pretty cool. You should, you know, make a patch and, you know, put it on SourceForge and I'll commit it." And I didn't know what any of those words meant. So I started trying to figure it all out and figured out how to make a patch, figured out CVS, and this sort of started a snowball of contributions. I still remember the thrill knowing that literally dozens of websites across the world were running code that I had written. And it was amazing. Fast forward about a year, and Michelle, who was kind of the sole developer of the project, kind of fell off the map. No one was really sure what happened. Just one day he stopped logging in. The website was sort of coming up for renewal, and it wasn't being renewed. A few of us had CVS access that he had granted as contributors, and the forums were still active, but Michelle wasn't to be found. And I did a post called The Blogging Software Dilemma, where I basically said I'm not sure what to do next. Like B2 seems cool, but it's not sort of being updated anymore. Text pattern is super elegant. Honestly, if text pattern had been open source, WordPress wouldn't exist. Movable type has the extensibility. Blogger has the sort of user interface. And what was there something that combined these all together? And this fellow, his name's Mike Little, left this exact comment on January 25th, 2003. Matt, if you're serious about forking B2, I'd be interested in contributing. I'm sure there are one or two others in the community who would be too. Perhaps a post to the B2 forum suggesting a fork would be a good starting point. And thus, WordPress was born. As you can tell, I designed the first logo. It was actually a year or two before we introduced blue into this. It became WordPress. And this was version 1.0. So Mike and I started collaborating together. We'd never met. A story familiar to many of you guys who had collaborated on open source. And started hacking on it. And really the first thing we focused on, it's funny, we called it the famous 5-minute install. It wasn't famous. But we called it famous, and it became famous. People saw, like, oh, it's the famous 5-minute install. This is amazing. And it was really in contrast to movable type at the time, which was much harder to set up. And in fact, movable type, the company 6 apart, how they were making most of their money at the time was by, you could pay them $50, and actually the founders would set it up for you. I say this just because I think it's very important to be careful about your business models. Because I don't think that they ever consciously thought, okay, we're going to make movable type harder to set up or configure because we're making $50 from it. They're smart people, they wouldn't have done that. But maybe subconsciously, as they were sort of sorting out all the things they were going to work on, the installation wasn't the thing they were coming back to, release and release again. So we sort of saw that as the first thing to work on, and hence the famous 5-minute install. And then usability. Sort of ripped out all the tables, changed all the markup, made it all CSS and XHTML compliant, and was off to the races. It was funny, in the beginning, WordPress probably had more developers than users. I couldn't get anyone to use it. So the first 5 were actually just some friends from high school. I actually just saw one of them last night. That's why I came in this morning. She got engaged last night, and she was one of the first 5 WordPress blogs in the world. And she still uses it. She posts poetry and things. So I'm very excited about that. Her name's Julie. So 2004. Now I'm going to go through the years and sort of say some of the highlights from each one and talk about sort of the milestones in WordPress development, because much like I wasn't as familiar with how Joomla developed before, kind of I was asked to speak here, I think that it'd be good to have a background of how WordPress has evolved over the years, and Automatic, which we'll get to in a second, as sort of a baseline for the Q&A. So version 1.0 came out, and this was also significant because it's the first release we started naming for jazz musicians. And all 20-some-odd releases since then have had a jazz musician they've been named in honor of. Prior to that, they were named for metals, gold, platinum, silver, but we ran out of those pretty quickly. I guess there's more metals, right? They're just not as interesting. There's lots of jazz musicians. We can do this for a long time. I got a job at CNET. So CNET paid me to drop out of college. It was kind of awesome. CNET Networks, they're now called CBS. I was sophomore going into junior, and they offered me a job, and I thought, well, I could stay in college 2 more years and hope to get a job like this, or I could move out to San Francisco, land a free air conditioning, and start right away. So I packed my bags, moved to San Francisco. Version 1.2 came out, which was very significant because it introduced plugins. Prior to that, the way that you modified things, not unlike PHP last year, is you would copy and paste code into a file. Actually, you just hack the core. One of our innovations was introducing a My Hacks file, where you could put all your customizations without modifying core files. But plugins was very, very significant. We did the first localization. And then our tipping point came, which was the movable type license change. Does anyone remember this? It was kind of interesting. Basically, movable type, which was now had a company behind it called 6 Apart, decided to change their license. It was still a proprietary license, so they were going from proprietary to proprietary. But in the jump from their 2.0 series to the 3.0 series, it was kind of a refactor, so they changed a lot of things but didn't really add new features. And they changed the pricing model. So people who might have been paying $30 before, they might have a lot of weblogs, and one guy was going to have to pay $500, $600. Now, A danger when you make blogging tools is you piss people off is you've given everyone a tool to write about how pissed off they are. And that happens. In fact, one of the essays that I consider sort of the tipping point for WordPress was written by a guy called Mark Pilgrim, and it was called Freedom Zero. As you guys know, as GPL devotees, Freedom Zero is the freedom to use the software for any purpose. And what he wrote about was how movable type had always been open enough. Because the code had been accessible, he could change it, he could run it, he could modify it, he knew what was going on. And the company had been pretty benevolent. But at this point, he realized that he wasn't in control of it when they changed the license. He realized that to upgrade to the new version, it would cost him $565. And he didn't actually truly have Freedom Zero. All he had was the convenience that made him forget about Freedom Zero. So he did a pretty unique thing. One, he took that $565 and donated it to WordPress. So he said, it's not about the money. It's about the freedom. And then he pinned this essay. To this day, is still one of my favorites. And it got picked up on Slashdot, all the giant news sites of the time, Corrosion. I don't think Dig existed, but fortunately, about a month prior, we had written a movable type importer that I had worked on. And the nice thing about writing an importer is that it forces you to have feature parity. So we didn't have multiple categories before or anything else. So I wrote a bunch of these features, wrote the importer, our 1.0 came out, the licensing thing happened, and a lot of people started coming through the door. We started getting about 1,200 downloads per day. So this was kind of the 1.0 days. 1.0, I have an essay that I think you all guys, use guys, be more Boston, should read, called 1.0 is the loneliest number. It's at this address, and it talks about kind of early days of WordPress, the original iPod, Steve Jobs, and why releasing is really the most important thing, because usage is like oxygen for ideas. So check that out if you get a chance. 2005 comes along. I founded a company called Automatic and hired a few of the early WordPress contributors. We ended up being about 5 employees. We got our logo. Ta-da! Funny story, most people don't know. One of the reasons we got a logo like this, it was designed by Jason Santamaria, was that there was a swag store. Anyone remember Cafe Log? I think it's actually still up there, so you can verify this by searching for WordPress on Cafe Log. We made a number of different items, and some of the items was underwear. So there was women's and men's underwear, and on the women's underwear, the WordPress logo, which was the text thing, wouldn't fit, or it would be really small. So in designing the logo, we were looking for something that was more like a Mercedes-Benz logo or BMW or something like that would work in a variety of situations. T-shirts, underwear, pretty much any place you want to put it. That was our driving force. I see you guys also have a good one there. Not the Joomla on the left, the logo part. So we've all learned from there. Version 1.5 came out, which introduced pages. So this was, again, super basic, but at the time was pretty different, because at the time, movable type was still dominant, and everyone used movable type had built in multiple weblogs. And what people would do is they would create, that was the #1 feature request for WordPress. They'd say multiple weblogs, multiple weblogs, multiple weblogs. And I didn't really want to do that, because it didn't seem, people would ask for this, and I'd visit their site, and they only had one site. They only had one blog. And so I was like, why do they want multiple weblogs? They only have one. And it turns out what they were doing was they were making multiple weblogs for different sections of the site. So they would make an about page that would be a new weblog in movable type, or like a gallery page or something like that. So I said, oh, that's silly. Why don't we just add a pages feature? So we added pages, so things that exist outside the chronology but still lived in the exact same data structure as WordPress post. Switched from CVS to SVN, had our first major fight. Can anyone guess what it was over? It's almost split the community. Like, this is the first time it almost forked. Any guesses? Not the license. We've been GPL from day one. No, not CVS to SVN. That was actually a pretty common thing going on then. It was kind of like Get Now. It was the hip thing to do. Commercial versus, nope. It wasn't a commercial thing. What's that? Release name? Nope. Not backwards compatibility. Not domain names. What was that? Not the database, MySQL since day one. Ownership? Nope. Not the programming language, PHP. Version control? Nope. Color? Last guess. Coding standards? Nope. It was WYSIWYG. People did not want WYSIWYG in WordPress for a variety of reasons, from very valid ones, like the code it produced was kind of crappy, to some more elitist ones, like if you don't know how to write HTML, you shouldn't be blogging. Actual argument made on a WordPress mailing list. We also introduced our first theme. You guys will remember this. Ta-da! This has been ported for Joomla, right? I think it's pretty hot. The blue gradient, it's coming back. Trust me. It's going to be in Urban Outfitters in a couple of years. So first theme, Kubrick. And actually, Automatic lost its first project, which many people think was WordPress.com. It was not. It was an anti-spam system called Akismet, because spam was a pretty terrible problem in those days. 2005 was also significant. Joomla launched. Oh, instead of a TM, it should be an R? Oh. I got it from... Wait, so we need a TM on the flag and an R on the Joomla? Use guys. 2006, WordPress.com became public, and this was actually a screenshot. You can't see it. There's actually two colors there, gray and white. This is a little washed out. But as you can see, we had very compelling reasons to get a blog, including why the heck not? So that was WordPress.com. We had 0 WordPress releases that year. Unhappy face. It was close. WordPress 2.0 came out on December 31st, 2005, and WordPress 2.1 came out in January 2007. But it was a rough year for WordPress releases. And what we learned from there is it wasn't that the release wasn't ready, probably 3 or 4 times throughout the year. We were just trying to get one more thing in. And we were doing more feature-driven releases. We said, if we just get this one more thing, it'll be a better release. And as you guys have learned, because you guys are on a more time-based thing now, that leads to ruin. But some good things did happen. We had the first ever WordCamp. There's now over 70 across the world in different cities. WordPress.com grew to over 500,000 blogs. Automatic doubled in size to 10. And we averaged about 4,000 downloads a day. And for the first time, we got a sense of how much of the web WordPress was powering. Google did a survey of sort of the world, and as a footnote in the survey said, we found this weird thing. There's this X pingback header on about 0.8% of the pages we looked at. And it turns out this is a standard, like competing the trackback, but we hadn't really seen it before. And everyone in the WordPress community went like, oh, that's us. We're like the only people who support pingbacks. In theory, it could have been a few others, but really, it was WordPress, and we were kind of out there on our own on that one. And so we got the first sense of sort of the impact it was having. And when I saw that number, I was completely blown away. Just the fact that going from dozens of websites to something that could be measured in a percentage of the web. 2007, we picked it back up, 3 releases. We did a redesign with an external firm. We had our first fork. So this was a community fork. There was a system called Habari, and basically it was after the whole WYSIWYG thing, it got rough. Not joking, actually. Because really had to push the WYSIWYG thing through. A lot of the community did not want it to be there. Ultimately, I still believe it was the best thing for our users. But there was a section of the community that felt that an Apache model, more of a committee-driven leadership model for WordPress, was going to be better. And so they did a fork and put it on the Apache Foundation. It was called Habari. It was about 4 or 5 of the main contributors to WordPress went over to this. And it was actually, it was one of those things at the time that was, made you really think about how you're doing things. Automat grew to 18. We acquired Gravatar and grew to about 10,000 downloads per day, so pretty significant growth. We also developed our mission this year. I'll just put it up there. The WordPress mission is to democratize publishing by making it easy for anyone to have a beautiful, functional web presence. This idea of democratizing publishing, WordPress didn't start with this. Like, literally, it started because I needed software for my blog. And Mike left a comment on my blog. Without that, it might never have happened. But when we started to see the localizations and the adoption in different places and really the impact it was starting to have, that 0.8%, we started to think, well, what could be the impact? Like, why are we doing this? Like, not just let's make the software better every release and faster and more gadgets, but like, why? And we realized that theory, and at the time, there was, which is happening now again, there was a lot of momentum on the web towards closed systems, proprietary licenses, closed networks, the Friendsters of the world at the time. And we really felt that the world needed an alternative to this. And the way that open source, and particularly the GPL, was going to win was not by trying to get everyone to believe in the GPL and the 4 freedoms and everything like that. That is a uphill road. Richard Stallman's been doing it for 20 or 30 years. I've been doing it for 10. People who understand it believe it. To me, it's the most powerful idea I've been exposed to in my lifetime. But most people just want to get things done. And so it seemed like the best way to have eventually to democratize publishing, have a majority of the web running on open source software, was to try and make that software. 2008, we picked that up, 3 releases. 2.7, we did another major redesign. It turns out the one the external firm did was not great, so we did an in-house one. Ended up being a lot better. Reached 4.4 million blogs, 22 automaticians, and this was an interesting year. So Automatic, which was the company, raised $30 million. A story that we don't really talk about publicly as much was the reason we did this was there was an acquisition offer. So Automatic, which again was 22 people at the time, had an offer to be bought for hundreds of millions of dollars. And anytime that happens, you think about it a lot. It's a lot of money. For me, vast majority of the ownership and everything would have been set for life, never out of work again. But I realized that if I had hundreds of millions of dollars, I'd want to do exactly what I was doing right then. And I wouldn't want to change a thing. I'd want to travel the world and meet WordPress users and talk at WordCamps and have this open source thing. And I'd be worried about commercial companies screwing it up, because the history of most open source projects begetting commercial companies is kind of one of maybe the company does well, like MySQL, but the community kind of dies off and eventually the product atrophies. And I wanted to show the world that that could be something different, because I do believe that nonprofits can do amazing things, for-profits can do amazing things, but when they work in conjunction, they can create something bigger than what either can make on its own. And there's not a lot of examples of that. And so showing a company that could be fully aligned with the community over the course of years and now close to a decade was really the purpose. And so we decided not to sell, raised some money, and kept at it. And that was actually the last time Automatic raised any money. It was in 2008, about 5 years ago. Grew to 23,000 downloads per day. 2 releases, repeated that. Automatic doubled again, 50,000 downloads a day. 2009 was kind of a quiet year. 2010, we only did 1 release. We almost had one of those repeats again, but it was a big one. Basically, 3.0 was when we really transitioned from being just a blogging system to a CMS. People have been using it as a CMS ever since we introduced the Pages feature, where it became not just you plug WordPress into the rest of your site. There were plugins to sort of embed it with iframes, I think for Joomla, for Drupal, other things that people saw as CMSs. But we thought, and we knew that WordPress had the framework to power lots of things. So we introduced custom post types and a number of infrastructure things to make it more amenable to that. It's also, remember Kubrick 5 years ago? We finally retired it. We had that big blue header for 5 years. It was horrible. And we started doing a thing. The theme we introduced was called 2010. Who knows why we called it 2010? We wanted to make it like a Madden. It would be embarrassing if in 2012 we were still running the 2010 theme, or 2015. So we thought by naming it by year, we kind of force ourselves to do a new one each year. And we have actually kept up with it. Now, we haven't always been at the beginning of the year. 2012, actually. Wait, what year is it? 2013. Just shipped. Just shipped recently, which is more than half the year later. It was around earlier, but actually being bundled with a WordPress release. So now we're trying to make that more like car models. So the release of WordPress coming out in December is actually going to include the 2014 theme. So for the first time ever, we'll try to get a full year out of it. there were two versions of WordPress at the time, WordPress and WordPress Mu. Mu stood for multi-user, or Mu, like a cow, because it's still from Texas. We decided to merge them together. WordPress Mu had always kind of lagged behind a little bit, and by merging the code bases, it forced us to do a lot of interesting things. But it sort of allowed us to unify the code bases between these two things that were 99% the same and had 1% difference. It was also the year that we passed 10,000 plugins. We went to 12,000 plugins and 1,200 themes, 72 automatitions, and we reached 300 million posts on WordPress.com. And finally, passed about 10% of the web. So a 10x from just a few years before. We're getting closer to now. 3 releases in 2011. We solidified custom post types. Only grew a little bit, so 100 automatitions. I'm sorry, I screwed up this slide. There's 2 repeats. Oh, but the big thing this year was Jetpack. And I actually have a full slide for Jetpack. Because a lot of people don't understand the relationship between automatic, WordPress.com, WordPress.org, and how Jetpack works between them. So basically, at this point, what had happened is WordPress.com has been developed for about 4 or 5 years, and had lots of network features that people on WordPress.org wanted, and things that APIs at the time weren't amenable to being distributed. So, for example, when you do a new post, you want to auto-post to Twitter and Facebook. Who's ever set that up on where you register as a developer, you get your API keys for all of them, you copy and paste the API keys in different things, you hope that you have all the SSL libraries installed so you can communicate securely. It is a huge pain in the butt, because these systems weren't designed to deal with hundreds of thousands or millions of independent running software. It was big services like Facebook designed to talk to other big services. On WordPress.com, to hook to Facebook, you click the button, pops up, says, can you post to Facebook? And you click OK, and you're done. So features like that we wanted to bring, or the .org audience really wanted them, and we saw that it was starting to really get growth. So people were starting to switch from WordPress to proprietary hosted systems, not just WordPress.com, but other ones that had these features built in. So the idea of Jetpack was you could still run your own site on your own server with complete control over the code. But Jetpack would bring you all these cloud features that sort of people actually like to use, and that are expensive or difficult to do on shared web hosting. Video transcoding, stats, right? How many people have had things shut? That counter script we were talking about a little while ago? When you get to hundreds of thousands of page views, your web host gets very annoyed at that. Dynamic image resizing. So Jetpack has this thing called Photon that basically takes every single image on your site and makes it completely dynamic. So with just query strings, and automatically based on the resolution of the screen and the width of it's being shown, it'll optimize that image to be displayed perfectly. Whether it's a Retina display, a low DPI display, whether it's big or small, whether it's on mobile. So a lot of these cloud features, which are trivial to do, because at this point Automatic's built up a cloud across multiple data centers that basically has, not infinite, but all the bandwidth, CPU, and storage space we could ever use. We could combine those. So that was basically that idea. We're almost home. 2012, 2 versions. We launched make.wordpress.org. We love verbs in WordPress. So to learn about how to develop WordPress core, you go to make.wordpress.org/core. Make WordPress core. You want to talk about accessibility? Make WordPress accessible. We didn't verbize. Oh, I just verbing. Make WordPress UI is where we do all the design discussions. But basically, we created this portal using a theme called P2, which is kind of how it's kind of like a social cast or a Yammer, but built as a WordPress theme. It allows people to collaborate and post really easily and have comments in line. We thought we could use this theme to encourage more collaboration outside of mailing list and track, which are awesome tools, but seem to... I'm a big believer in the medium dictates the content. And if you were going to design a perfect medium for people flaming each other, it would look a lot like mailing list. Where you can excerpt sentence by sentence what other people say. Mailing list, ultimately, discussions come to be dominated by whoever has most time to spend on the mailing list. Something I realized is I had less and less time to spend on the mailing list. And also, I think that I'm a big fan of inline replies and everything. I do them myself personally, but I think it is a conversation type that's not very natural. It's not like you and I would have a conversation. That does encourage kind of nitpicking and sort of entrenching of positions. We think P2 solves a lot of this, so it's kind of what we started using. 123 automaticians. We passed 33 million blogs on WordPress.com and reached 15.8% of the web, which brings us today. Almost done with 2013. We've released 2 major updates, and there's another one coming out on December 12th. I put that in there to publicly commit to the date. Like many projects, you guys might know this. Sometimes software takes longer than you think. Kind of funny like that. So we've had, there's some releases we've been within a week or two. Some we've been months behind. We tried a new development model this year where we actually started 2 releases simultaneously. So both 3.7 and 3.8 started at the same time. 3.7 led by Andy, who's right here, and 3.8 led by myself, the first release I've led in a few years. And for 3.8 and for 3.7 as well, we decided to take rather than have everything go through sort of a core commit process, where there's a finite number of people who have commit, we decided to develop all the new features as plugins. So everything was available as a plugin first. Not that we wanted to be a plugin forever. We're not going through the Drupal, everything's a plugin model. But developing it as a plugin allowed you to be a lot more carefree about who's having commits, what you do in it. Distribution was easier because people could one-click install the plugin and get auto updates for it or update notifications. So it actually worked really, really well. We had sort of 4 projects that are going into the 3.8 release, and it's looking like we'll be on time. The sort of window for getting them all in closes on Wednesday, and we're hoping to do our first ever week-long code freeze. So literally 0 lines of code changed between December 5th and December 12th when the release comes out. So we will see how that goes. Dragons lie here. Part of the reason I wanted to work on it, and because at this point, well, it's later in the slide, Automatic's over 200 people. I mean, very, very busy otherwise. It's pretty different. And I was curious to see just how it was going to feel as a release lead and sort of this model where it's almost like a position. It's like, how they have this, I'm BDFL, right? Benevolent Dictator for Life. In theory, that's my title or my role. But it's the most powerless dictatorship in the world. There's no planes. There's not that many perks. You can't really do anything without the community. And so that's why I call it a powerless dictatorship. And I don't think you can do anything without deeply understanding. So we didn't want to try to switch to a different release model without deeply understanding what the sort of implications were of a plugin-led model and having all these different committers and the plugins, and what if one didn't go in? Would people be mad? And so we are in the process of figuring this out. This is a work in progress. A big thing that came out in 3.7 was auto updates. So now WordPress core, when 3.7.1 came out with bug fixes, all the WordPresses that were able to updated themselves, and people just got an email that their site had been updated. We had a 99.997, or 3 nines and 7. 997 success rate, so only a couple of hundred sites failed. And within those, the system's very grab Andy about it. He'll talk your ear off about all the millions of contortions it goes through to work across, the heterogeneous host, Windows, Linux, different file permissions, things that can happen, checking the integrity of the files over the wire. There's a bajillion things that go to this happening. And we're doing this for core right now. The vision is that in the future, we'll do it for plugins, we'll do it for themes, we'll do it for major releases as well as minor releases. So, let's say you load up Facebook today. What version of Facebook are you running? Right? Even on your computer, what version of Chrome are you running? You can go and look. It's like version 33 or something like that. But you don't. You're just using Chrome that day. And that's eventually how I want WordPress to work, where you just open up WordPress and you get that day's version of WordPress. On WordPress.com, we push code live to the site, so deployed to thousands of servers over 100 times per day. As a developer, that is addictive. It's like crack hits. Like, it's amazing how great it is to be able to iterate and ship things fast and see how people use things and move quickly. I think this is how modern software development can and should work. And so shifting our open source project to be more like that, meaning that we can iterate just as quickly as our proprietary competitors, I think is key to WordPress remaining competitive over the next 10 years. Put a major redesign in, the MP Stitch project, a light redesign of the dashboard page and themes. And where we're at today is just over 27,000 plugins, about 2,000 themes, 220 automatizations, and the network of sort of WordPress.com plus people that run Jetpack now reaches over 1 billion people per month. It's about 3 billion cookies, about 1 billion people, and 27% of that is mobile. And the latest numbers were at 20.5% of the web. So that's sort of state of the WordPress today. I know that was a lot of things to go through, but it was a decade. We just celebrated our 10th anniversary in May this year. Thank you very much. You guys will be there soon. It was a lot of fun. It also very humbling. This has now been a third of my life. I'm now 29. This started when I was 19, so a little over a third. And it's also what I want to do the next 10 years and the 10 years after that. WordPress is my life's work. I love it. And the thing we've learned, I think most over all this, is that it's a work in progress. To the extent we've been successful, I think it's largely attributable to that we've never been too stuck in our ways of doing things. It's very tempting, especially when you're successful, to say, oh, we did that, it worked, let's keep doing that. And so what we have to cultivate, and we're not always good at this. This is something we aspire to, not something I'd say we're good at. That to always be questioning and re-examining your most base assumptions. Like, it's going to be way too hard for WordPress to auto-update itself. That's something that the web host should do, or that third-party scripts should do. When you re-examine those sorts of things and say, if we were building WordPress from scratch today, how would we do it? How would we architect the data? How would we develop new features? What would be sort of how much would be in JavaScript versus PHP? These are the things that you have to look at and sort of re-examine it at every step of the way. If you're curious, also, I put some Automatic stuff in there as well because to show that there's been a parallel growth. And Automatic's now 8.5 years old. Actually, my 8th anniversary there was just last month. I was not the first employee, actually. I was the third employee. The first was this guy, Donico Queeve in Cork, who was actually the founder of WordPress Mu. He was the first ever guy to join. I still kept my job at CNET for a few months, so I could pay him. The parallel growth, I think, is a different model for how open source commercial and non-commercial entities can interact. And if you're curious about that, to see how Automatic is different from like Acquia or some of these other companies, Red Hat, there's actually a book that just came out about it. The title's a little funny, but bear with me. It's called A Year Without Pants. I found out that apparently in the UK, pants means underwear. We did not title the book. It was this guy, Scott Birkin, who was an author before. I was a big fan of his books. I hired him at Automatic for 2 years. He led one of the teams, and it's sort of his story of being at Automatic for 2 years, around the creation of teams, actually. And it's a pretty good one. It's got like 4.6 stars on Amazon. I was really worried about particularly the title and the cover. It's a picture of underwear. Actually, oh, wow, I didn't even think about this till just now. Remember how I said, part of the goal of the new logo was to have it fit on underwear? He wanted to put it on there. But luckily, all the trademark requests come to me. I said, no way in the world you're putting the WordPress logo on some American Apparel red, tidy whities. Or the tidy reddies, I guess. It's red underwear. And so it does not have the WordPress logo on the underwear. But otherwise, check it out. It's a great book. And it tells a lot of the story about how the open source and it's also the creation of Jetpack is in there. So it tells a lot of that story. So that's what I got. Thank you guys very much. So I think we have a little time, or a fair amount of time for Q&A. I was going to have a handheld. Did we? Oh. Hello, hello. I've got you under my skin. We're going to try and use the mics for this. I realize that the acoustics in here are really good, but there's a live stream going on. So come up to a mic, stand up, and tell me your name and what you do. Because I'd love to hear more about the Joomla community and talk about... I know what you do.
10 seconds or less, Brian.
Okay, I'll give up.
Does he ask long questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
WordPress has a very different attitude to the licensing of templates or themes to Joomla. If I understand it correct, and please correct me, we say that the PHP must be GPL, CSS, image assets, JavaScript, they can be whatever license you want, and with WordPress, you're saying that everything has to be GPL.
Not quite. So for themes, it was actually a huge controversy. If you want some entertainment, you can watch an hour-long debate with me and a guy in a wife-beater shirt on the licensing of themes. Just Google Mullenweg and thesis, and you will find it. Basically, it was a prominent theme, actually one of the top themes in the WordPress community at the time, that said it was under proprietary license. We thought no. We worked with the Software Freedom Law Center, who I know has assisted you guys over the years, and they said the exact same thing. PHP hooks very tightly into WordPress, so it should be GPL. CSS themes, or CSS images, fonts actually don't need to be, because they don't have sort of the they don't invoke the execution, so they don't have the virality of the GPL. But what we said is, as a community, we're only going to promote or link to things, or allow you to speak at WordCamps or any of our official community stuff if you're 100% GPL. Because, as you know, a theme without the CSS or JavaScript is not very useful. And really, the core of us is not necessarily the ins and outs or the loopholes of the license, but the 4 freedoms. Freedom to run the software for any purpose, the freedom to modify how it works, the freedom to see how it works, the freedom to distribute that. And so anything that restricts those 4 freedoms, we just don't want to send our users to, right? Because that's not a good expectation. You came to WordPress because it has these 4 freedoms, or you really like big blue headers. And we only want to point you to things that preserve those 4 freedoms. So, controversial. Around this time, they called it the Easter Sunday Massacre, where we took like 4,000 themes out of the directory because they had some backlinks and non-GPL stuff. Controversial, but it ended up working for the best. And in fact, we linked to commercial theme providers on WordPress.org. They're not part of our directory, so that's a difference from Joomla. So everything in our directory is 100% GPL or compatible. So they're not in our plugin directory. You can't get them from inside the dashboard by default. But those businesses do very, very well on their own. There's probably about half a dozen now that make anywhere from $3 to $8 million per year. So it's a very big ecosystem. And the beautiful thing is they're 100% GPL. So this guy's big fear was that if he went GPL, he would lose all his customers. And we now have people that make way more money than him 100% GPL. So I thought that was fantastic, not just for us, but for sort of open source in general, showing that you can preserve freedoms and still have a great business. And yeah, it was pretty fun. I was kind of hoping, because there haven't been a lot of court cases on the GPL, any actually. And I thought we finally found a guy stubborn enough to actually take it to court. So I hired like the top IP litigator in the United States, and we were ready to go. But then he open sources PHP. Big difference, though, is we do not promote or link to commercial plugins from WordPress.org. Much to the chagrin of commercial plugin developers. They're doing okay, too. There's a few out there, like Gravity Forms, make millions of dollars per year. But one of the things that we noticed as a community, that plugins are fundamentally functionality. And there's nothing that we've ever done in core WordPress that hasn't been a plugin first, if we're honest about it. When you introduce commercial aspects into that, particularly money, as a motivator, as an intrinsic motivator, it changes the dynamics of open source collaboration quite a bit. Let's say I have an SEO plugin and you have an SEO plugin. There's no incentive for us to combine our SEO plugins if we're both making 20K a year from it, because then we make 10K a year probably, There's all these sorts of, it encourages, I think, a balkanization of development, a balkanization of efforts. It becomes because of that, it can become more confusing for users because now there's multiple options to the same thing. And if that plugin, like right now, if we bring a plugin into WordPress, we work with that person. And that's like the gold medal. Like plugin developers are thrilled when things come into core. If you're paying your mortgage with that plugin, and now we want to bring it into core because we think that's the best thing for the community, that's a very different dynamic. So that's one of the reasons we do not promote the commercial plugins, although they're completely allowed and encouraged. And so we don't discourage them. Those people are still welcome at everything. It's just we don't link to it from WordPress.org, et cetera. No problem.
I'm Brian Mitchell. I'm with Intergen Web Solutions, a web development firm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. There's a lot of, I think one of the things that distinguishes WordPress is the hosted versus, download and install. I'm always astounded that every time I see information about market share, that there's not a distinction made between, because there's a huge difference from an end user perspective between I'm going to go to your website, click a button and I've got a blog, versus, and I know a lot of the hosts have sort of that one-click install, but I've got to commit to being a customer first. So for me, it's a huge distinction. It massively impacts adoption rates, all of that. So it's more than just sort of the base trivial nature. I'm really interested in the breakdown in terms of market share between those two models.
So it depends on which numbers there are. Well, it's all WordPress. I mean, WordPress.com
Right.
runs the same software you download from the site.
Right.
And we've actually open sourced all of our 99% of the plugins and code we run there that allows you to do it. In that 20.5%, that number is from a site called W3Techs that surveys, I think, the top 10 million and looks at what they run. They don't count subdomains. So WordPress.com counts as one, including all its subdomains. People with map domains do count. So I think how that breaks down, though, is it's massively .org weighted. So although for numbers of blogs, from what we can tell, WordPress.com and WordPress.org have been about even since WordPress.com was created. For that top blogs, the top 10 million, I think it's about 18% are WordPress.org and only about 2.5% are WordPress.com.
Cool. Thank you.
On unique domains. How about over here?
Hi, I'm Don Gilbert. I'm on the Joomla production leadership team, and some of the things we've been discussing this week is how can we better serve and really understand who our target audience is, the places where they're hosting our software. And I was talking with Andy, and he said there was another rift in your community, like with the WYSIWYG, was when you enabled stats gathering, so you could really understand your audience better. And that's something that I would like to pursue for Joomla, so we can know when can we upgrade and when can we change minimum requirements. Minimum requirements for WordPress is still 5.2. So how did you guys deal with that vocal minority that really was anti-stats gathering?
I think we just did it.
You just did it. It's a long question for a short answer, yeah. Thank you.
So our stats gathering is the update system sends some variables along with the update ping. So when it checks for the update, it says the PHP version, WordPress version, et cetera, a few different things. That could be abused, I guess, in a lot of different ways. And WordPress.org, the software that runs that update stuff, is not open source. Although we'd like it to be at some point, it just hasn't been yet. So, there's some very valid concerns there, but I think practically, lots of people besides myself have looked at that code. It's not doing much. There's so much data coming through, I don't even know if we could do something with it if we wanted to, beyond the very basic stats we gather. And I think the utility eventually outweighs it. So
We have time for one more question and then our
Can we
group
do
photo.
lighting just to get these guys out of the way?
Yeah, lighting, that'd be great.
So I'll try to answer quickly. I can be a little bit verbose as well.
Hi, my name is Mike Demopoulos. I gave a talk, a loving talk on WordPress on Friday. I'm just curious what your thoughts are of the CMS Garden. You're a member of it. WordPress.org is a member of the CMS Garden, 12 Open CNS.
Yeah. It's great. I think the flowers are beautiful. I like the hibiscus. It's really fantastic. That was a quick one. Okay. tell me what that is later. So.
Okay. Mine's a little more convoluted. I guess I've been involved in a few open source projects over the years, and it seems as if we're doing really well on the web, but there's a lot of threats in a lot of different areas, from apps to where our identities are held. Automatic with Gravatar and a few other tools seems to be placed to have an open source influence in more than just the web. Are you guys expanding into sort of perhaps Mozilla-like attempts to use Gravatar as an open source identity, or are you thinking beyond simply blogging in terms of spreading open source?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the products that Automatic has, including Gravatar, Kismet, Simperium, which we're going to be open sourcing, really, we're a plumbing company, right? I love working on technologies that are part of the fabric of the web. And a lot of what we do is, or what I try to have the company do, and really is built into the ethos, is taking, even if something isn't technically open source because it's a hosted service, how can we have it have those same ideals? Maybe it's around portability of data, maybe the code is open source so you can see what's going, but how can we get that out there? So some place like Gravatar is, I think, actually pretty interesting, because you can take this hash and get maybe arbitrary key value pairs as well as just an image. Not a ton there yet. More there probably, honestly, 2015. But next year, a lot of things we're open sourcing around synchronization technology is going to be fantastic for mobile apps. Do you guys have a mobile app? Like in the Apple App Store? Ooh. So we started doing that in 2008. It's been really tough. It's difficult to build an open source project on proprietary platforms. But obviously, I think phones are going to be big. Maybe next year you might all have smartphones. So that's something that's been really important and also really hard to do as a community. To be candid, pretty much 100% of that is done by Automatic right now, even though it's all open source. It hasn't been a lot of community involvement, partially because I guess all the iOS developers are doing other things. But we're thinking about it. Thank you. And last one.
Hi, I'm Jordan from Reaction Marketing up in Red Deer, Alberta, and like my thoughts were, what do you think about how WordPress is kind of evolving from just being like web publishing and a blog into being more than that? Like I see a lot of people using it, of course, for like CRMs, project management, stuff like that, beyond what like you'd originally think it's for.
Yeah, and this was actually something I talked a lot about at the State of the Word this year. So for the extended version, check out State of the Word 2013. It's sort of our State of the Union speech. We used to think of it as 3 phases that were sort of happening in serial. So like WordPress as a blogging system, WordPress as a CMS, and now WordPress as an application platform. How we look at it now is that we've actually had elements of the application platform there from day one. Just the primary application we were building on it was our own. But as you know, thousands, tens of thousands of developers sort of sometimes learn PHP from WordPress or sort of are very fluent in that environment. It's just fast and easy for them to build other things. And so I think, you know, people always ask me, like, non-technical people, I have these engineers, what should I have them build things in? Should I do Go or Node or PHP? Or should I? And honestly, the answer is whatever they're going to be happiest in, right? If you're, as a manager, forcing people to work in a technology they're not having fun in, the results will not be good. And so for the people who have fun developing things on top of WordPress, we're just sort of trying to do things because we're those people as well. So make it easier, make it better. And people are doing things like, there's this YMCA app I show in the State of the Word that it's not even a website, but the backend is completely powered by WordPress, and it's tracking people's workouts and you can do the LeBron James workout at the YMCA, and it scans your card from a mobile app and pulls up your user account. It's pretty sweet. So check that stuff out. I think it is kind of maybe our next 5 years, just how the last 5 were more CMS oriented, and I'm excited about it. More open source is more better. Cool. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.
Okay, well, that was a really phenomenal session. We are going to do our group photo right before our 3 o'clock talks, 2 o'clock talks, pardon me. So if everyone can come down, face that way. We will start our photos, our photographers heading to the top level. And there's no session after this talk in this room, so if you'd like to stick around and Matt has a couple minutes, you can ask some extra questions then.